She's fine.
Tiwari, let's start.
Yeah, Chitrakshi, are we ready to start? I think she has to.
Yes, sir. We are
go,
good to go.
and she has to allow people to come in. Chitrakshi, is okay to start?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chitrakshi. And thank you, everyone. Friends and colleagues, it's my privilege and honor to welcome you at the 5th episode of the 10-episode webinar series on cities and climate change, with special focus on Chennai. As you know, this is 105th webinar of the series. INHAF is running for the past 3 years on rethinking cities, especially rethinking Indian cities. This 10-part webinar series is special in the sense that it involves around a live action project INHAF is doing in Chennai called Climate Chennai. I think it is only appropriate that I share with you what the project is and what we are trying to do. The Climate Chennai project has probably 8 components or streams or main agenda items. One is to understand Chennai, and this I think is the most important, understanding Chennai city's preparation to meet the climate threat by knowing who is doing what among the key stakeholders. What is government doing? What is civil society doing? What is business doing? What is industry doing? That's the first part. Sharing that information and knowledge with the concerned people, I thought this was very important. We found out this was a big gap, that things are happening, but no one knows who is doing what. And I thought the need to kind of, share this information. Third is try and build a platform for sharing, learning, and co-action. This particular webinar series is one, and I think the very fact that we're doing this 10 webinar is a part of building that platform, identifying specific areas of advocacy for mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. That's the fourth thing. Then studying cities master plan and master planning exercise through the climate lens. We had started with this earlier. At one point, we thought we won't be able to do it, but more and more we work on it. We realize this is a very important part. We've got to kind of go into that in as much detail as possible. Working on, with others where possible, on decarbonization strategies and plans in the selected thematic areas. And then studying the state and the city's policy and action agenda for the vulnerable communities, important, and working on climate justice. This is the thing that we added most recently by undertaking pilot action in selected vulnerable communities, both poor and non-poor. I like to say this is not correct to say that it's INHAF's project. It is Chennai's project, the city's project, its citizens' project, yours as much as ours, as it is one of the many efforts to equip Chennai to deal with the climate challenge adequately. We are not only debating key challenges, we are also informing and requesting you to join, help, share, strengthen this effort. Your input and contribution are needed. And this was something that at least I was trying to kind of push for last 1 year, that we are going to reach out to people and say, we need to join this whole effort. This is not only ours. The first 4 webinars in this series have debated first COP28 that took place in Dubai, and especially how it handled the urbanization matter in the context of climate change. Second is an overview of climate change in cities. That was our second webinar in this series. Third was urban flooding and extreme rainfall. And the fourth was urban heat island, which was the last week. And today's webinar is on urban transport. We have a very competent panel moderated by Dr. Raghunandan, and we look into various dimensions of the transport in the context of climate change. This is the part of small introduction, big introduction on this particular meeting. But I also must take 3 minutes more and tell you why are we doing this webinar series, why we are on this for last 3 years, why this is 105th webinar, and what is it, why we are doing it, what has been experienced till date, and where have we reached in what we sought to achieve. I thought I just say this, this webinar series has 5-point rationale. And this is important. I repeatedly say this because I think this is the message which very much like to get across, and that is this. Number one, that our cities are not in good health. Now, this is not a good thing to say, but that's factually correct, that our cities are not in good health, that they are saddled with major challenges in every sector, be that infrastructure or investment or planning or financing or governance or sustainable development or plant growth. Anything we are saddled with large number of challenges is the assumption based on which this entire effort has been put in place. Second is, worse still, the way they are growing and developing, the cities do not look like meeting the challenge of unprecedented urbanization India is witnessing, and it's not possible that we could do this adequately. Neither in form of providing safe and healthy quality of living to 870 million people expected to be in our cities by 2050, that is in 27 more years, or generate 7 to 8% economic growth. The country needs to get rid of its pockets of poverty, both rural and urban, and emerge as an economic power. Third consideration is the government efforts alone are not adequate to ensure healthy, livable, productive, inclusive, and sustainable cities. And this, for the fourth one, is the most important one, that the wider society, the human capital outside the government system, has the required skills, knowledge, experience, and even motivation to contribute meaningfully in search for alternative approaches and new solutions. And the big point that we have considered is this, that we are fast running out of time, that there is an element of emergency. We need better approaches and innovative solutions early, as delay is causing enormous harm to the planet, to the nature, to the environment, and to our people. This webinar series is as part of a wider national societal effort aimed at bringing in not only fresh ideas and new perspectives, but also new voices, new collectivism, new togetherness, new partnership, and energy in articulating the need for and ways to rethinking our cities. We need to rethink our cities, and that's an important message, both redefining the urban challenge and finding more effective ways to deal with it. It is taking the urban challenge to people. It is preparing them to engage and contribute. It is making the urban development challenge a societal challenge, a people's challenge, along with that of the government. So that is the whole thing. And as I said, we have completed about 105 webinars. we are going back and saying how effective we have been in our communication and how far have we reached in terms of achieving even part goals and objectives. This is not the time to talk about it some other time. Maybe I was thinking this morning that we would have one webinar fully on where we are and what have we learned. So with that introduction, let me hand it over to Dr. Raghunandan to conduct the session today. And thank you very much for all panelists. You're very busy people, and I'm glad you're here, and we look forward to hearing you and your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirtibhai. Chitrakshi, if you could get ready with my first presentation on the framing of the issues, that'll be nice. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. As Kirtiji has just introduced, this is the fifth of this particular series on stemming from the Climate Chennai study focused on Chennai. We've put together this panel not necessarily of people with background and experience of working in Chennai, but to look at the broader issues of the urban sector and transportation with a broader pan-India perspective or experience of other cities. While we have with us at least two speakers, Dr. Venugopal here, who's from ITDP on Chennai, and my colleague Karthik, who was supposed to be here to present our studies findings on the transportation sector, but he is unfortunately held up. So I am substituting in his place. So I'm afraid I'll be boring you with my presence again at the end, the last presentation. The two webinars we've had before this, apart from the introductory one on COP28 and an overview on the urban sector and climate change, have been on adaptation and resilience issues in Chennai. As Kirtibhai introduced, they were on extreme rainfall and on the urban heat effect. Besides that, we are focusing on some of the key mitigation issues as well. And this one is on transportation. Chitrakshi, if you'll go to the next one, please. We'll be dealing with two or three of the three or four mitigation sectors after this. We've got this one on transportation, followed by ones on waste and on the building sector, and finally on power generation. So as I said, this one is on transportation. So I'll make a very brief presentation on some broad issues, framing some broad issues which I feel we are dealing with in Chennai and which we think are also issues which cities and the urban areas in general in India are facing. And I think there are common issues across the cities besides the city-specific issues that we may speak about. So a broad perspective on this is that transportation is a multidimensional issue. It is shaped by and in turn shapes urban infrastructure, the urban economy, the urban plan and form, the culture of the city, and city life in general. So although transportation has a major role to play in reducing emissions, which is a particularly important target, certainly in Chennai, which has formulated a city-based Chennai Climate Action Plan. But it will also play a role in the national direction that we take in India towards a low carbon or a net zero pathway, which India has committed itself to achieve by 2070, and Chennai city has taken it upon itself to achieve by 2050 in its Chennai Climate Action Plan. So although it has this major role to play on emission reductions, the measures that we take with regard to transportation must take into account all these other aspects we spoke of earlier, of infrastructure, of economic life, how the city is structured and planned, its culture, etc. So the issue that we have to look at is, how are such mitigation measures to be conceived or planned? It's not a simple exercise like, let us say we want to reduce emissions from coal-fired power plants. It's a fairly straightforward single issue thing. While it may have some related issues, you basically have to bother about the plant itself and how to reduce emissions there. But transport is a multi-dimensional issue. We have to take many issues into account. Next, please. Yeah. So far, India's NDC basically comprises three major sectors: emissions intensity or energy, or emissions efficiency, energy efficiency, power generation, and forest or tree cover. The NDC revolves around these. The commitments we've made are those, while the NDC document has spoken about a few other issues, including in transportation. It mentions the railways, it mentions metro rail, and so on. But after COP28 and the global stocktake, now updated NDCs are expected to be submitted under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change by mid-2025 or so. So India is going to have to work on that. And documents of the COP28 have also made clear that these updated NDCs should be economy-wide and multi-sectoral. So obviously, India cannot be sticking just to these three main sectors. We have to cover a lot of other sectors also, and look at the economy as a whole. And within that, to frame these issues. Clearly, transportation, especially urban transportation, can and should make a major contribution towards this. I don't think that we can escape that, because transportation is the second or third largest source of emissions in India, and the perhaps fastest growing source of emissions has been in transportation. So we have to take that into account. But if we do so, there are advantages as well, because major transformations in the transportation systems of the country, whether it is urban systems or it is intra-city systems, is that they can drive major transportations in major transformations in the transport sector. It can also drive major changes in urban development, as well as major changes in industry, particularly in the automotive sector. So how can this be conceived as a multi-dimensional, multi-pronged effort at simultaneously addressing urban transportation while also addressing these larger interconnected issues? And how can one, as a group of people who are interested in this, consisting of groups of experts, social movements, etc., how do we get together in an advocacy effort to include this in India's NDCs in the next round? Next, please. Linked to this is, how do we visualize these changes in the transportation sector, particularly in urban transportation, in terms of either existing policies or what we can think of as potential new policies. Some existing policies can clearly be leveraged perhaps with some changes, modifications, etc., like the FAME policy on introduction of electric vehicles, a new policy announcement which has been made focusing specifically on EV buses. And the government has committed, the central government has committed itself to introducing 1 lakh new EV buses across the country, with bulk of the funds coming from the union government and some contributory funds coming from the state government. Then there's the clean air initiative. There are urban specific plans like Amrit, etc. There are many plans which can be leveraged to bring about transformations in urban transport that we seek. But do we also need, apart from leveraging these separate existing policies, do we also need a new policy on urban transportation? There have been earlier such policies dating back 25 odd years. We've had policies on urban transport, etc., although they've not really taken root. The Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission also had some focus on urban transport, and you still see in many cities of the country JNN URM buses plying there. In fact, in several cities or towns of our country, the JNN URM buses are almost the only contributions in the public transport system. So, do we need a new policy on urban transportation, or even a wider transportation policy of the kind they have in the European Union, for example, under which you have a framework within which to decide between towns, between cities, what kind of transportation do you envisage? Is it going to be rail? Is it going to be road? Is it going to be high-speed rail? Is it going to be by air, etc.? Rather than in India, sort of sporadic ad hoc moves about different modes of transport between cities. While we grapple with these questions of national level policy, requiring advocacy efforts, etc., what can cities or states do on their own, or by leveraging existing policies of the kind I mentioned above? Chennai has embarked on a climate action plan of its own, and we'll be looking at that in more specific terms to see what kind of policy frames they are thinking of, how they are planning to implement those leveraging existing policy frames, whether this kind of action is feasible for other cities as well. Do urban governance systems allow for those? These are, I think, some of the issues that we would be grappling with, and I hope in one way or the other, all the speakers would be covering these issues directly or indirectly as they make their presentations. And I hope we will have time towards the end in putting all these strands of discussion together and taking them up to see where we stand. I'll stop there with these issues. Chitrakshi, that's the end of it, right? Yeah. So thank you. And I'll just stop with that. And I will now ask Anumita to kick off our discussions with her presentation. Anumita, 15 minutes, please.
Right. Thank you so much, Raghu. And this has really been an amazing opener, both from Kirtiji and you, to set the whole agenda and the agenda for discussion forward. So it's been very insightful. I'll just share my screen first. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Anumita.
Fine. Thank you. So clearly, like what you have said, Raghu, it is so clear that the transportation agenda today has to take on two massive and very big environmental agenda today. One, that how can transportation action contribute to the local challenge of clean air and public health, and also the global challenge of climate change, which you have explained so well to us. Now, this is something where we really need to deepen our understanding that what is the role of transport in contributing to improvement in and meeting the public health benchmark, as well as reducing the climate or the carbon intensity of the mobility. So if we just make those connections first, it's fascinating when we have the conversation around air pollution, for instance, we often find that the whole public attention is concentrated on Delhi and NCR. And very rightly so, because the moment you begin to see this kind of heat map, and that flashes this red patches all over, indicating very poor to severe air pollution in just not in Delhi NCR, but across the northern India. It kind of breeds a complacency in the eastern, western, and even southern part of India, thinking that as if air pollution is not really a big challenge. In fact, if you look at Chennai, and this is the heat map for Chennai, you can clearly see that you see a lot more green and much less yellow and red. But what is interesting first about this heat map is that the PM2.5 concentration overall in the city could be much less compared to what we see in Delhi. But if you go by location of after location in the city across different parts of the city, you do find that there is wide variation, and there are some areas in the city which have much higher level of pollution, and that there are areas in Chennai that can record pollution which is classified as very poor, which is several times the permissible limit. The other point that you need to keep in mind, because we must understand that it is just not the level of pollution. It is, if you look at the disease burden associated with air pollution in different states of India, and this particular estimate, which was done by the ICMR and other groups who came together some years ago, and they estimated how many people die because of air pollution in different states of India. Now, yes, in absolute terms, the overall numbers for Tamil Nadu or Kerala would be much less than the states of northern India. But if you try to understand those numbers in terms of number of deaths per 100,000 population, then you actually see there isn't much difference between the southern states and the northern states. Now, this means, and what the science is telling us, that we really don't have to wait for the pollution levels to reach as high as what we see in Delhi to die and fall in. In fact, the most of the deaths and illness occur at a level that you actually record in Chennai. So therefore, there is no place for complacency, and that's something that we really need to keep in mind. There are different sources of pollution, but why vehicles are a special problem, that's something that we really need to keep in mind. Now, in any city, you have several sources. You have power plants, you have industry, you have construction, waste burning, vehicles. But this is a very interesting pie chart that you have from the report, which was prepared by the Ministry of Health when they looked into air pollution and public health. What you see here is that if you take the contribution of different sources to ambient air concentration and at the general ambient air concentration, then in Chennai, vehicles contribute about 45% of the concentration of PM2.5, which is also very high. But if you try to understand contribution of different sources to our exposure, that how much do we breathe, and to that, what sources are contributing more. So PM2.5 exposure apportionment shows that what matters are those sources who are much closer to us, like vehicles, because they are on the roads, we live by the roadside, and therefore, if you consider exposure apportionment, then vehicles' contribution in Chennai could be as high as 63%. So just look at how dramatic difference it makes to that when we look at it from the public health perspective. And there are more studies that have come, for instance, in Delhi, like what Health Effect Institute have estimated, that the maximum exposure and the maximum impact of vehicular pollution is on the roads at up to 500 meters from roadside. If you apply that criteria to the population distribution in a city like Delhi, then more than 55% of Delhi's population live within 500 meters from some roadside. Now, if you try and apply that to Chennai, it would be almost equal and could be more, depending on how densely built your city is. Now, that's where the risk is. And therefore, when we do and take our monitors with us and assess our exposure, you can actually find out that, yes, what we breathe actually when we are traveling on the road is much, much higher, not only compared to the permissible limit, but also compared to the general concentration in the ambient concentration. Now, that's what really makes vehicular pollution so dramatically different and very, very serious for our health perspective. Now, there are many studies that have come up which looks into that what vehicles do and the specific impact of vehicular pollution on health and so forth. I'm not getting into that. But the other message that I really want to give in the context of transportation today, that, and this is a lesson which is emerging from Delhi. Now look at Delhi, what it has tried to do to control vehicular pollution. Yes, it has got BS6 emission standards like you have, but in addition to that, it has phased out old vehicles. In fact, today in Delhi, almost 15% of the new vehicles are already electric. And at the same time, we have put restrictions on trucks. And so a lot of action has been taken on the technology side of the story. But even after doing all of that, the vehicles have continued to remain one of the major contributors to air pollution in Delhi. In fact, if you look at the forecasting, the hour by hour forecasting of IITM, then at any given point of time, vehicles can contribute up to 50% of the local sources to air pollution. Now, that clearly shows that it's just that the technology solution cannot be the full answer to the problem. And we have to therefore combine the whole mobility strategy. And this lesson has come to us from the pandemic, when we have seen dramatic decline in air pollution, simply because there was a dramatic decline in activity because of the lockdown period. But then we cannot shut down our city to clean up the air. But how do we therefore plan? So to that, therefore, is also the other story that is combined with the climate story that you have talked about, that air pollution. And when we're looking at all the data coming from IEA or any other agency, that the vehicles are going to be one of the massive contributor to the oil demand in the future, and which also means huge impact on CO2 emissions. So clearly, therefore, the agenda that we are discussing today is that how do we get the core benefits of taking action? So we have to look at technology roadmap, but the question for us today is this solvable? What we see now today, city after city, whether that's Delhi, whether that's Gurgaon, whether that's Chennai, this is what is emerging on the roads of our cities today. And what it is leading to. Now, therefore, what we are seeing today, the numbers, the sheer numbers, just not that the vehicle numbers are growing, but we know that the more and more people living in our cities are going to travel more in the future, that the trip length is expected to increase because the city size is going to increase and sprawl. The dependence on personal vehicles is going to overtake public transport. These are the forecasts made for overall India. And therefore, this is the doomsday that everyone is talking about. So when you begin to look at the motorization rate today in our city, whether that's Delhi, whether that's Chennai, clearly what you're seeing is a robust rebound after the pandemic dip. And therefore, this is the pace at which the new motorization is taking off in these cities. And therefore, do we have a blueprint to deal with it? Because when you look at it, that this whole motorization today is dominated by two-wheelers and cars, and also the steady shift towards the bigger and the heavier engines. The SUVs today are already 35% of the new car sales. And yet, every time we say that when all these negative trends are becoming so bullish, but at the same time, we always try to understand our opportunity. And when we look at the census data for the work trips, we know that even today that the majority of our people are still walking, cycling, and using public transport. And yet everything is going wrong. So when we had looked at the share of how people travel in our cities, in about 14 cities, clearly among the mega cities, the Mumbai and Kolkata certainly have a bigger advantage in terms of higher share of public transport with much more diverse systems present. Now, Chennai is among the the 6 mega cities, Chennai is just above Hyderabad. But what is interesting in that study that we did, we looked at that how much pollution urban commuting is locking in. It's not about the total vehicle population in the city and how much they are emitting. This estimation is about the way people travel in our cities, the modes that they use, how that is locking in particulate pollution. And clearly you can see therefore the Delhi and Chennai are at the bottom and that they are locking in the maximum pollution in the way people commute in the city. Now, these are some of the telltale things that we see and the congestion building up. And what is emerging today is clearly that the strength that we had is we are increasingly losing that strength. So today, what is the irony is that when the travel demand is growing continuously in our cities, we are seeing bus ridership coming down continuously in all the STUs. And the declining ridership, the pandemic kind of had a major impact on their earnings, so they are finding it very tough to recover their ridership today. And the ridership loss had actually started in the pre-pandemic phase, including Chennai, where you can see that how ridership has. I do not have the very latest figures, but the overall message here is that we know that to be able to re-engineer and to rebuild our infrastructure for public transport and mobility, I mean, there's an enormous investment that has to now flow into the sustainable mobility. And therefore, which may even that the NTDC report that had estimated that India needs to invest about 8 to 10% of its GDP in the transport for that rebuild. But the very interesting question, and Raghu, when you talked about the PM Bus Seva, it's very interesting that today when we are looking at the future and to re-engineer the bus service and the bus system, we are looking at the electrification, 100% electrification of the buses going forward. And there's a massive support coming into it. But what is also emerging today, that while there is a lot of optimism around bringing so much of electric buses in different cities, just not in mega cities, but also in the smaller towns and cities today, as the PM Bus Seva is saying. But before that, we have to fix mobility. Now, why am I saying that? That today, Delhi perhaps has one of the largest electric bus fleet among all the cities today. But what is fascinating is that even though the bus numbers are increasing in Delhi now, but the bus ridership has plummeted sharply. Their economic survey shows that a sharp drop of about 48% in bus ridership since 2017, and more empty kilometers are being driven. In 2023, Delhi has the largest electric bus, but the slow buses caught in congestion are just not attractive. People are not using the buses. So therefore, what's the point in that investment if we cannot use that to re-engineer? And the bus is just not about a vehicle. Bus is about a service that people like. So where is the whole strategy to really rebuild the bus system to provide reliable and affordable service? And when we had looked into the affordability of the service of the buses in Delhi, it is very interesting that if you go by the yardstick that in relation to the threshold of 10 to 15% of income that can be spent on transport as the upper cap of affordability, which is kind of accepted globally. And when we applied that to Delhi, we realized that about 1/3 of the Delhi's population stand excluded from basic non-AC bus service because they cannot afford the basic bus fares. Now, therefore, there are a whole range of issues that are emerging today. When you look at the taxation, that the buses get taxed more than the cars, and a lot of the equity issues that are emerging today. So that's one part of the story. This other part of the story that we have to also address is that whole sprawl and the way urban planning is happening today. The World Bank study shows that for the 12 largest Indian cities, it's kind of showing that the most of the new urban development is all happening outside the municipal limit. And more we sprawl, the average strip length is increasing, and that, of course, is blocking in more and more pollution. So wherever we have tried to look into the redevelopment, new affordable housing coming up, we are beginning to see that how everything is happening far off from the urban, it's all beyond the urban periphery. And as a result of that, as the distances are increasing, so you can provide housing somewhere, but you are not providing the right services, the connectivity, the transport. And that's also creating huge amount of inequity in accessing services and so forth. So therefore, the transport cost has increased for the bottom of the 50% of the population. So all these factors are coming in. So one is the whole urban planning and the sprawl. The other is the way the road engineering is taking off in our cities. So if you look at the city today, the roads, it's a very typical image of a road that gets built in our city today. So what you see that the multi-lanes and then there's all one-way traffic, the width of the pavement shrinking. You do not allow people to cross where they need to cross. You're barricading the direct access and then forcing them to climb the foot over bridges, which means that the access to public transport is becoming, the degree of difficulty is increasing manifold. And this kind of engineering decisions that are taken in the city, this cannot be undone easily. But more and more of this happens, it just kind of decides the choices for the commuters. It's so difficult to access a metro or a bus in this kind of streets, then they will increasingly stop using public transport. They will reduce unless they are captive users. And therefore, and then, as you can see, that how the safety is also compromised, because then people are forced to cross where they are not allowed to cross. So therefore, these things are contributing hugely. The other side of the story that we have to address very urgently is the demand side. So it is just not about how much how much road is space is there for the vehicles to be driven, but it's also the demand that the vehicles are making on the public space for parking. Now, we have looked at Delhi and we found that if about 23% of Delhi's geographical area is under road network, another 10% of the public spaces are now to meet the parking demand. So almost 1/3 of Delhi's space, the real estate value of that given away to just meet the needs of the vehicles. And therefore, if we are not, it's a huge land issue that is emerging today in Delhi. Now, what is interesting is that the policies are changing. In fact, Delhi perhaps is the first city in the country which has now got notified its parking policy as a demand management policy. And where they're very clearly saying that, do not do spot fixing. Just do not say that, okay, there's a huge parking demand here, let's go and make a multi-level parking. But ward by ward, make your parking management area plan, demarcate the legal parking area, ensure that you're not providing parking in green areas on pavement near the intersection, meet those requirements, and then provide legal parking, demarcate that, then penalize illegal parking, and then do variable parking, so that you are also, while you are organizing parking for the existing demand, you're also reducing the demand for parking. But then, even though interesting pilots have happened and we have seen interesting changes after the parking management area plans were implemented in some parts of Delhi. But then this is not scalable. There's a huge resistance today, and we have not been able to take this forward. And that's something we really have to understand, the power of that change, that once you can have policy, but if you do not have political and public support for this, then it's very important to attain scale for implementation. And then to undo the whole urban planning, which is contributing to more and more motorization, and to therefore reverse the trend. Today, we know that at the national level, also at the city level in several states, that the transit-oriented development policies are emerging. But very interesting today, in Delhi, for instance, giving you the example, where the master plan, Delhi 2021, it has set a target. In fact, this was an earlier target which we have not been able to meet, but this is a new target taken on again, that at least 80% of the motorized trips should be public transport trip, which would essentially mean that we have to increase the modal share for public transport by at least 1% a year for the next 10 years. But then what is interesting about this is that once you have all our entire current metro stations and the transit systems in place, then it's estimated that about 60% of urban area will be within 15 minutes of walking distance from the MRT stations. The UTP and DDA, they have also estimated that after full implementation of Delhi Metro, about 80% Delhiites will be within 400 meters of some metro station. Now, just imagine the power, what a big opportunity that is, that if majority are within the access range of a metro transit, then if we are able to then make the city more accessible, walkable, cyclable to access the transit, and also cap the parking and price the parking, that it is bound to make that big shift happen. But then, even though we have all these policies in place, but we are not being able to see the scalable change that is needed, which is to bring more people to live close to the metro stations, do the mixed-use development, mixed income development, even though there are some interesting changes happening, that even the building typology for TOD needs to change in an urban planning context. Because the moment you say mixed use, you cannot have gated development. You need to have active frontage. You cannot have super blocks, but smaller blocks. But in the same building typology, you should be able to combine the retail and the residential. And these typologies are beginning to emerge in different cities. This example is from Kolkata. Now, even though we have the National Habitat Standards, we have the TOD policy asking for all of this, but again, and even though we have some examples where the right things are happening, but again, it's how do we make it happen? It's also very interesting that the new concepts are coming up. So therefore, when the railway, for their station redevelopment plan, they adopted the urban form-based code. It's a very interesting principle that they are highlighting. What they're saying is that forget about how you're going to distribute the development, whether how much residential, commercial, that you can think later. But first, what you fix is the form of the development, the size of the block, the network of the streets. You fix the form first and then plan the development. And that's exactly what is needed. But we do just the opposite. We first decide how the big super block of residential we are going to build, how super blocks of retail we are going to build, and then think about the road network around it. So that has to change, and it's a very big forward and that we need to look at. So clearly what we are saying today is that the percentage of share of a sustainable mode has a lot to do with the way our urban forms are organized. And clearly we see that the global south has more cities where you have more compact urban form and therefore more higher uses of sustainable cities compared to the northern cities. But IPCC is also telling us that the transport activities will plateau at a lower GDP level in non-OECD countries like India due to high urban densities and greater infrastructure constraint. But then we should be able to plan for that better to be able to leverage that. The final segment that I just want to highlight a couple of points, that what comes as a barrier, that you may have policies, but then on ground, we are not being able to realize the potential of these policies. So I just mentioned the transit-oriented development policy, which is asking for permeable streets, it's asking for smaller blocks, mixed development, etc. But when in Delhi, for instance, I'm giving you this example from the one of the most prominent TOD zone, like the Tiwari Nagar, when the redevelopment happened, we did not follow those principles. We actually created a gated colony in the most prominent TOD zone, and where you just cannot cross the system at all. Similarly, it's very interesting. We have found that in different places, wherever the developments are happening, even though they follow the principle of being within the 400 meter of some metro station, but then because of the gate and the walls put around the development, which can a 50 meter or 100 meter walking distance becomes 1,000 meter walking distance, and a distance therefore becomes motorable. So clearly, therefore, this whole linkage between how you're designing your road, your buildings, your blocks, and your transit, all of these will have to come together. And that's something that we are just not being able to do that. And then when we build flyover after flyover, thinking that we will be able to decongest our city, and we know that it's just not working. But in the process, what it is doing is that this kind of A to B distances across the road, how they get disrupted when we put a flyover and then a foot over bridge. So this A to B then distance then becomes a crossable distance to, again, an 1,800 meter distance. And then again, and people don't understand, because we never do this kind of impact assessment of the infrastructure, that how, therefore, the majority of the short distance, which were originally walkable and cyclable, got converted into motorized strips just because of this infrastructure intervention. Now, this is the kind of impact assessment that we need to do to be able to develop steel. So therefore, now we have to look at the policies for reversals, that the transit is just not creating transit, but we now know that in any city, we have diverse modes of transport. You may have a metro, but you certainly have buses, but you have paratransit, you have cycles, you have people coming. But then how do you design it all well for the proper integration, for easy access, and then easy transfer? And also, so these are the small changes happening in different cities where we are trying to pedestrianize, we are trying to redo the streets, and these are the happy streets that everyone is talking about. And it is good to see these changes happening. Even Chennai today is talking about the mega street project, about all these things I talked about. But then again, what we continuously saying today, that this shows the future, but then how do we build the scale? And that's the scale and the speed of action. That's what is going to matter in the future. So going forward, while we certainly need to stay on course with the technology pathway, energy efficiency, and zero emission target to make our vehicle fleet fully carbon neutral, But we need certainly simultaneously scalable, integrated, connected, and reliable public transport systems and services. We have to scale up network of walking and cycling infrastructure for an efficient last mile connectivity. We certainly need restraint and demand management measure. Only supplying public transport is not going to be enough. We need to reform taxes, recover true cost of owning and using personal vehicles, adopt compact urban form, ensure that is happening, shift budgets from road building to public transport, active transport and zero emission mobility, reduce infrastructure degradation, integrate the needs of urban poor with land use planning, and adopt measurable and verifiable impact and monitoring system. So I think we have the template, we have the formula with us. We just now need to make the change happen. And every time we keep talking about the political will, but we also have to say that the political will also changes when you change the public will. It's very interesting today in Delhi. I mean, it's all fine when we talk about the zero emission vehicle. But the moment we say increase public charges, it can even trigger a riot in the city. So clearly, we have to, the middle class environmentalism now has to work for the harder and more difficult solutions that we need for clean air and climate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anumita, for that very wide-ranging presentation, which underlines the fact of how multi-dimensional transportation systems really are. So thank you again for that. And may I just remind all our participants that as the speakers speak or in between, you're free to kindly put in your questions or comments either in the Q&A section or in the chat box, and we'll get a chance to take them up later. Without further ado, may I now request Professor Geetam Tiwari to speak. Geetam ji?
Yes, thank you so much. Let me just share my screen and I will start right away. I guess people can see the presentation now.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, so in this short presentation, first of all, thank you, Kirti ji and Dr. Raghunandan for organizing this. In fact, I have been attending all your previous webinars also. They've been amazing and very insightful. So in this short presentation, I thought, let me just highlight about, we all keep talking about the appropriate transport systems. You, in the beginning, made those remarks, transportation is multidimensional. Anumita has shown a lot of data on what is happening, the externalities caused by transportation. So what is an appropriate transport system for cities? So that is what I would like to focus on. And actually, it is out of this report. I've given the link to this full report. Whoever is interested can look at that. Okay, what do we want from a public transport? So I'm not getting into the benefits of public transport. I think those are well established, whether we talk about local or global externalities. So, of course, if you look at it from citizens' point of view or the system providers, we are looking at public transport system that can ensure mobility to majority of the citizens. And it can meet the reliability and comfort offered by private modes of transport. And for our cities, actually, the understanding that the ownership of motorized two-wheeler is at least 4 to 5 times more than cars. So it's motorized two-wheelers that is really competing with public transport. And this is very, very important aspect we have to understand while we start providing public transport. So just one slide on giving that if you just see here, there are a lot of research by different groups here and showing that what are the benefits in terms of greenhouse gas emissions of different transport modes. And you see that the main thing which is emphasized here that even an electric car is 1.5 to 2 times worse than a diesel bus. So it goes, really highlighting that how important the public transport, whether it's any kind of bus, but of course, electric bus is going to be better than a diesel bus. And this is what I was showing you earlier, that even the 2017 data is showing that 60% urban households own motorized two-wheelers. So when we are thinking about introducing public transport, which is going to solve our problems for climate, for local pollution, for congestion, but we really are competing with the economy, comfort and convenience of a motorized two-wheeler. Okay, when as a commuter, we are deciding what modes to use. I think for commuters, most important is convenience, reliability, comfort, and risk in this order. So as a pedestrian, of course, when we look at our data, the risk is very high. As motorized two-wheelers, we find in our data, the risk of getting in traffic crashes are very high. However, the convenience, reliability, and comfort overrules the risk perception. Because for individual, risk remains low because it depends on how many times you do the activity, and people who actually get involved in fatal crashes, there is no learning. So that's an important also idea to understand. And since public transport is provided by government or operators, what are they looking for? So they are really looking to improve their load factor. More people should be using the system. All the benefits that get calculated by providing metro or by providing buses is linked to number of people using it. So, and here the load factor is really that we are competing with motorized two-wheelers. So how does the bus that we are providing or the metro compare in terms of reliability, comfort, and convenience with respect to motorized two-wheelers? And the numbers that Anumita showed earlier, that in Delhi, we are finding, and all most Indian cities, that even after providing increasing number of buses, the ridership is not increasing. And the reason is very clear, because are we providing comfortable, convenience, reliable bus service, or we have just provided the technology, electric bus? So this one very quick exercise I always like to show, and this really gives a good understanding. If I'm doing a 3-kilometer trip and I have various modes to do this 3-kilometer trip, and I'm just going to, so if I walk, it's going to take 25 minutes. If I bicycle, it's only 12 minutes.
Geetam ji, I think you disconnected. Chitrakshi?
Yeah, looks like that.
I think her connectivity is gone.
Hmm. So,
Do
Raghu
you
sir,
have a Do you have a number, Chitrakshi?
So we will call her.
Just call her. Just see, maybe electricity is gone.
and she's in Delhi.
Sorry, I lost this connection for a few minutes.
Okay.
I'll just quickly
I was
reshare.
just trying to reach you. Okay, thank you. No. Glad you're back. Would you be able to connect? Huh?
Yes, I have connected now.
Okay, thank you. This is a very important slide.
Yeah, can people see the slide now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. So yes, I was explaining that if I do a short trip, a 3-kilometer, it takes about 25 minutes if I walk, about 12 minutes if I use a bicycle. And then I'm actually marking if I use a very efficient bus system. And the efficient bus system is simply that the bus stop is 5 minutes away. I wait for 2-3 minutes for the bus to arrive, average waiting time. And then the bus speed is about 30 kilometers per hour because it is not getting stuck in congestion. And then I reach my destination 3 kilometers. It takes me about 20 minutes to get to my destination. Little faster than walk, but more than bicycle. Now, for the best case scenario, the metro station is exactly at the same place, 5 minutes away. But before I board the metro, it is little longer because I have to go either underground or elevated. So that's additional time. Metro speed is little faster than bus because the metro stations are little far away. And then finally, when I reach my destination, it has taken little longer than a bus. So for a short trip, road-based systems are little faster than exclusively grade separated systems like metro, which is very reliable, very efficient, but just the access egress makes it little longer for the total journey time. And then of course, if I look at two-wheeler or car, if there is no congestion, it is the best. Fortunately, and to me, it is, fortunately, I would say that it is not that predictable in congested conditions. Car can take much longer, but see, two-wheeler does not get stuck in congestion. Two-wheeler can still do it faster than any other mode. So here we are really extremely, we have to make public transport very, very competitive. And that really comes from improving access, egress, and in-vehicle time. Same thing, same exercise, if I do for say a 12-kilometer trip, then you see systems like metro have real advantage. So this is an important understanding, and this we simulated for many different trips. The understanding is if the trip is greater than 5 kilometers and less than 10 kilometers bus journey, then the bus time traveling in bus is within plus minus 5 minutes of metro. But if the trip is longer, 10 to 15 kilometers, this is where metro systems start giving a real advantage. So having this understood this, now let us look at what kind of trip patterns do we have in our cities, because our cities traditionally have been compact, mixed land use, and high density. So when we look at our census data, we found that this is the distribution you see. Less than 5 kilometers of any city size that you see here, ranging from 1 to more than 80 lakhs, 8 million. About more than 30% trips are within that. For smaller cities, the share is much higher. More than 55% trips in small cities are short trips. What happens to other trips, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, and then you see the longer trips, which I showed very useful, very reliable. I mean, that is where the metro gives you the major benefits. Very, very small percentage. Even in large cities, we don't have that much. Next thing we explored in this report was looking at affordability. So, we using actually the same indicator that Anumita was suggesting, 10 to 15% of your income should be used for transport. So we estimated that minimum household income required for one person to travel by metro, the household income has to be 36,000 per month. And when bus travel is concerned, and this is using Delhi data, the household income has to be 12,000. So based on this, we found that only 10 to 18% of the population, only in a few urban districts, can really afford bus system. And when we talk about metro, this percentage goes down to 4 to 5% only. So here we are showing the distribution of households where the monthly income is 36,000 for different city sizes. And we find that proportion of trips which are more than 5 to 10 kilometers varies from 20 to 40%. And proportion of trips which are more than 10 kilometers is only 11 to 17%. And proportion of trips which are longer than 20, and this is where metro will really be very attractive, is only 7 to 8%. Same exercise we did for in households which are likely to use bus systems. And here also we find that it varies between 8 to 18% minimum. So now putting these two things together, trip length, distribution by city size and incomes, what people can afford and what kind of trips we have in our cities, we find that 10 to 18% of the population in 10 urban districts can use a metro system. 4 to 5% and 6% of the population living in districts with population of different sizes that are shown here. That is where the trips are longer and they can afford a metro system. And only 2 to 3% of the population will travel longer than 10 kilometers, and these lengths would be very attractive for metro systems. All right, so now as a city designer or people like us who are worried, I mean, the city planners, the decision makers, the other stakeholders, we want to have an appropriate public transport system. And we should be looking at what is an appropriate public transport system from passenger point of view, from operators point of view, and from social perspective, climate change, local pollution, etc. So from passenger point of view, of course, the commuters looking for comfort, reliability, and also which is actually provided by private modes of transport. The commuter is also looking at total walking distances for passengers in one-way trip. This is where we are looking at the quality of access and egress. I can use a metro. I may be living only 500 meters from the metro system, but if the quality of that access trip, pedestrian infrastructure is not attractive, then I'm not likely to use it. And then what is the total delay to every passenger, every trip is also important as far as passengers are concerned. What about the operators? Operators are looking at system capacity. If I run a bus system, if I run a metro, I want people to use it. Only then I will get the full revenue. And this really depends on system design, the frequency. Buses will become attractive for people if they have exclusive right of way, if they don't get stuck in congestion. Operators are looking at better commercial speed, and this better commercial speed also comes from exclusive right of way and stop spacing. An average per stop delay and junction delay is also coming from whether on our junctions we have given traffic priority to public transport and road design. So a lot of operator indicators are really dependent on the way we are designing our system. Infrastructure, the way we are designing our traffic management system, that is what is impacting the services that we are providing from buses. And then social indicators, yes, the most important social indicator will be that when I provide a system, what is the potential of private transport to shift to the system that I have provided? If I provide a metro system, what is the likelihood that people from two-wheelers and people from cars are going to shift to metro? Similarly, if I provide electric buses or any bus service, what is the probability how many people are going to shift to this? So this is where we have to actually start understanding that the shift will occur only when I meet the commuter demand. If I'm not able to compete in terms of reliability, not able to compete in terms of comfort that is being provided by private mode of transport, then the shift is not likely to happen. And what is the potential for retaining existing public transport? Because we've seen that already in Indian cities, large number of people are using bus systems. They are captive users, but how can we make them choice users? Even when they have option of using a public motorized two-wheeler or a car, they should prefer to use public transport. All this comes from design. It is not about commuters' attitude and allowing universal access, barrier-free mobility primarily. So now these 5 questions we can answer in order to decide what is an appropriate public transport system for any city. How to reduce dependence on private motorized modes, clearly understanding what is commuters' preference, how to retain current public transport users as income and vehicle ownership grows. So again, we have to see how we design our infrastructure and system operations, that people who have choices of using other modes of transport prefer to use public transport. And how to increase share of public transport users and pedestrians and bicyclists, all leading to net zero emissions that we are targeting from transport systems. And this is dependent on infrastructure and system operations. What proportion of population can be served by the selected system? And this is where we have to get an understanding of trip length distribution and affordability. We can make a very large metro system, but it is only attractive if I'm doing a long trip. If I'm doing a short trip, other modes are more attractive. What level of subsidy will be required to run a quality public transport services? And this is where the state has to understand, or at a city level, what are the financing options? Because a public transport cannot be run as a business. It's a public service, like providing clean water and clean air. So that part also, the subsidy also has to be understood. Okay, so here is some data. And we have put together what is, different city sizes, what is the current availability of buses. And you see the column which is in red. So in parentheses is showing that what is the standard required to have an optimal bus system. So for example, for Bhopal, it is saying that there should be 13 buses per lakh population, but the standard is there should be 20. So if you just run through this column, none of the cities meet the actual requirements. And you go to even larger cities like Delhi, it is 150 per population, but we are running only 22. Maybe with some new buses coming, this 22 may have increased to maybe 30, but not more than that. So what the analysis I showed you earlier, all these cities, the percentage of trips which are most conducive for buses is much larger, but we are not able to provide adequate number of buses where people find it comfortable. And of course, the next level comes providing reliable services. And what about metro? Yes, we are going ahead. We have gone ahead and done at least in 19 cities invested in metro systems. But based on the understanding of trip length distribution, we find that percentage of trips, the second last column, which is most conducive for metro system, in small cities, you can see it's a really small percentage, 8 to 12. And not all these long trips will be on metro. So the most optimistic case that 50% trips may be here. So actually only 4 to 5% trips in Kozhikode would be likely to be useful for metro. So you just go through this and you will find in the last column that even in Delhi, not more than 10 to 15% of total trips will become attractive for metro system. And that is why we have to, now this data is available and from all these different metro websites. This is not the survey done by us. This is the ridership data provided by the metro systems. And you see here, actual ridership on metro is 50% or less than the forecasted ridership. None of the systems. Delhi has 400 kilometers of metro now, and it's only 47% of the projected ridership. And this is very important to understand because all benefits are overestimated and costs are underestimated. And we have done huge amount of investment. So all financial internal rate of return and economic internal rate of return are overestimated. And these are the numbers used to justify these systems. So we have continued to invest in these systems where the ridership is not there, and buses have been continuously ignored where there is people are still using buses. All right, so there are many different technologies we can look at. There are advantages of these completely exclusive right of way. So at grade and elevated both, we can run these different kinds of light rail systems. We can run trolley buses. This is also electric bus. Here the advantage is the battery size becomes much less. But actually in Indian cities, we are not really experimenting with many of these systems. And we are kind of just going ahead with one major, in the name of clean public transport system, metro. And you mentioned earlier in NDC also, as far as transport is concerned, only metro is mentioned. We do have electric three-wheelers for IPTs. So really we have to understand, the kind of cities, the distribution of trips we have. We need a mix of these systems. No one system can really provide the mobility needs of the differentiated demand that we have. So here we've done this little exercise looking at different category of cities. So we're looking at very small cities like Ambala, Mathura, etc. And trips shorter than 5 kilometers are suitable for walking and bicycling. So when we do this, we actually show that in these small cities, we have very little arterial roads, mostly sub-arterial roads where the right-of-way is small. And here, if we just improve our current IPTs and maybe small buses, this would actually meet all our targets of 2030, of 2040, of meeting SDG targets, providing quality transport within 500 meters. So here is this exercise done for Bulandshahr. For category 2 cities, nearly 50% trips are shorter than 5 kilometers. So here also, metro system doesn't make any sense, but buses can be run on shared right-of-way with bus stops and with proper crossing facilities. So this exercise has been done for another city here, Patiala. Similarly, we have done this exercise for cities of the size of Agra, Vizag, Patna, Kanpur. So we have 45% trips are shorter than 5 kilometers. Trips in the range of 5 to 10 kilometers are suitable for bus systems. And we can consider introducing BRT systems here in small segments where the buses are not getting stuck in congestion. And then city can start planning for higher capacity system if we expect that in next 20, 30 years, the city sizes will grow and the percentage of long trips will grow. So here is this exercise for Visakhapatnam. And then similarly, we go to the next level of cities and we find here then now in this city sizes, we have trips longer than 10 kilometers, which are suitable for LRT or metro system. So this is about 2,500 per kilometer trips we can expect in these kind of cities. And city bus complemented with some exclusive BRT systems should be able to meet this demand. So city can also start planning and implementing higher capacity system. The most important thing here would be strong integration with existing bus networks. So wherever we even start planning metro or metro-like systems, which are completely exclusive, grade separated, integration is very important because that alone is not going to solve our problem. And then here again, you see another city size here. And so this exercise we continue. And finally, we come to the largest city that we have like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, etc., where 35% trips are short trips, but high capacity system like metro will be required to serve the long trips. But we should be very aware of it that only 17% trips are longer than 10 kilometers, maybe 20, not more than that. And in the best case scenario, not more than 10 to 15% trips will come. So we should provide a system like metro to serve these long trips because in absolute numbers, they would be huge. We are talking about very large cities. But unless we integrate with very, very efficient bus systems, at-grade systems, and bicycle and non-motorized, walking systems, we are not really answering the full not really providing good mobility options to all citizens. So in the end, I just looked at, your approach paper, and I found that these were things listed there for climate action for Chennai also. And I'm quite aware of Chennai roads. I've been part of this exercise, what's going on with the help of World Bank, this Chennai road projects. And I feel that, repeatedly studies after studies have shown, and I'm happy that Anumita also started with that, technology alone is not our answer. Repeatedly studies done in global different locations have shown that unless we strengthen walking and bicycling, we are not able to make a dent in our global or local pollution levels. And of course, all the health benefits that come with it. So really, non-motorized transport should be given the highest priority. And if we look at Chennai Road also, it is very easily possible to do this. The way to do it is that in main arterial roads, you provide exclusive places for bicycles and walking. And for smaller roads, all you have to do is control speeds. Mixed traffic is absolutely fine in small speeds roads. And this I would put as number one instead of putting electric buses. And then I would suggest that this should be followed by very strong measures to improve bus systems and improving bus services, not just providing an alternate technology. And that should be integrated with metro system or metro-like systems. That is what is going to give us the full advantage. So basically, I think what I really want to highlight is that when we are looking at these, our cities, the kind of challenges that different sizes of cities are facing today in India, we have to understand the differentiated demand. Different public transport systems are suitable for different travel patterns. Short trips will need something else, and long trip will need exclusive systems like metro. Differentiated travel demand should guide the choice of public transport system to ensure that majority of the citizens can access a high quality public transport system. An integrated system can ensure high ridership of public transport. If we integrate buses with metro and with walking infrastructure, that is the best option. A very strong bus system becomes an automatic feeder to metro. So unfortunately, we keep looking at metro and bus as competing systems. We have to understand that these two are complementary systems and they should be planned together. And therefore, integration of these systems at policy level, planning level, and design and regulatory framework will ensure high quality public transport. So bus routes running on parallel metro network serves as feeder mode. It is not competing mode because bus is going to meet the demand of short trips and special feeder buses are not required. Investments in metro systems alone has not addressed the requirements of public transport. We have ample example from Indian cities also. And actual ridership has been less than 50%. I showed you that data. Current bus availability has serious deficiencies in all our cities. So bus systems require priority investment to improve and to serve quality and compete with motorized two-wheelers. And metro and bus systems must be integrated at all levels. And this is a major lacuna, and this requires a new institutional mechanism. At present, we do not have this mechanism in any of our cities which can do this kind of complete integration at policy, planning, financing, operating, and infrastructure level. So this is where I would like to stop. And again, I would just reiterate that basically it's the understanding of differentiated demand and understanding of these different systems is what is really required. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geetamji. Thank you. And without further ado, I'll ask Dr. Venugopal to please make his presentation. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Is the screen visible, sir?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been an insightful discussion so far. And picking on one of the last points that Professor Geetam Tiwari mentioned on the importance to prioritize non-motorized transport, I'll try to contextualize the discussion so far into slightly more to the Chennai context from some of the works that Chennai has been doing, especially in the non-motorized transport space. The image that you see is of Pedestrian Plaza. More images to follow for those of you who haven't been. My name is Venugopal. I'm a program manager at the Institute for Transportation Development Policy. I'll keep the presentation brief, but I'll just cover two parts. One, while it's been very insightful that the organizing team has been doing a series around Chennai, and thanks for the opportunity as well. I'll share more specifically on what the journey has been and some of the ongoing works so that we can pause and reflect on some of the learnings. Some things have worked, some things haven't, and there are learnings in the city to take it forward as well. And number two, similar to the previous speakers, I'll just try to touch upon what some of the other Indian cities have been doing, some of the common challenges that we at ITDP have observed in other Indian cities that Chennai could also embrace going forward. So with that in mind, the first section on Chennai's journey, the why part of it, I think both the previous speakers explained in detail on the need for prioritizing public transportation, better planning, NMT. So in Chennai, how did Chennai prioritize streets? Number one, Chennai was the first city in 2014 to adopt a very progressive non-motorized transport policy. It was one piece of the puzzle in the right place, which helped sort of snowball many other actions. Very critically, some things in the policy have worked. There are some things which the city still needs to work on. 2013 onwards, the city focused a lot on capacity development. The city realized that it needs to strengthen its team, take them to other cities in India like Pune, who had done projects to understand, even for the contractors, the quality of implementation, the quality of design. A lot of hands-on session along with Anna University that was done, and SAP for the engineers on how they need to look at designing streets for people than vehicles, like the previous speakers mentioned. Senior officials taken to Singapore from an intent of inspiring institutional structure and other actions. This followed with the city taking up multiple roads as part of the bus route roads department. And there were local architects from the city, from different firms in the city that worked along with engineers to develop designs. There was fund that was allocated. For example, this snippet from the 2019-22 proposal, where there was fund allocated to prioritize basic improvement of footpaths in the city as well. And it was a substantial allocation, which happened year on year. And piece by piece, there were fragments of improvements of streets in different parts of the city. And I think as on date, around 170 kilometers plus of streets have been done in portions. This is the journey so far. There are critical insights on where some of these streets stand right now, some of the challenges that the city faces, which I'll try to come to later. Some of the glimpses of the before and after were basic design changes. For example, the utility box, which was kept perpendicular to the wall, which is hampering the movement, it was aligned in parallel to the wall. Basic footpath width was given as per street design guidelines or IRC. You had more streamlined parking as per the guidelines that is mentioned. So these are the before, after the transformation that happened. Local design firms developed this, and the city implemented. These are some more glimpses of how the footpaths in different parts of the city. This is next to a school zone in Harrington Road. Access to bus stops. But in these images, if you look closely, these are slightly more recent. You can already see some of the operations and maintenance issues of the street as well, which is a challenge that the city is facing right now. Alongside all of this, the city also started from 2015 something called as open street events. It's called by the name of Rahagiri in many cities around Delhi and UP as well. So this started along Besant Beach, along with Hindu and a few organizations in Chennai. It happened for around 3 to 4 years, and it sort of restarted a couple of years back, along with Times of India. It happened not just as one event, but it happened for 8 months. 8 solid months, every week, every Sunday, in a different location in the city. These car-free Sundays or open streets used to happen. It used to attract a lot of crowd to envision how they can have pedestrian-friendly streets and pedestrian-only streets. Now, this sort of sparked the city to take up a pilot project. It so happened to be a project that's been in the pipeline for a long time, in conversation with multilateral banks, but due to some delays, it did not happen. And finally, when the Smart Cities mission came with the funding as well, the pedestrian plaza in Chennai, this is the before photo where it is a prominent shopping street. This is the kind of parking that was there, a lot of smoke, noise, concerns that were there by the people. And this is how it is transformed as of today, the before, the after. This is how it was before, the condition of the street, and the same space, same photo. This is how it is right now, where we've done impact assessment surveys where one side from the shoppers who come, you have parents who say that they feel much safer to like let go of their child's hand so that they can run and play because they feel it's much safer. You have women who mentioned 80% of women who've said that they feel much more safer to come to such a street compared to many other parts in Chennai because it's much more vibrant and lighting and, eyes in the street. So it was a good example for the city where many things worked. At the same time, there were some things that the city has taken learning from as it's scaling up. Few more before-after examples. This is the before example of the street. This is the after example of the same street where design has been done. Finer elements, understanding the users, toilets, and feeding rooms, which are accessible. It's not just it's built and it's locked up. It's working, and it was done through a PPP model as well. It's very critically put. It's not entirely designed for seamless access, but then compared to it was a benchmark, a step up from where the city was at that point of time. Some more glimpses of when the same street hosted the open street events. It continues during the Margari events in December, etc., to host music festivals and whatnot, attracting a lot of crowd. So those of you who haven't been there, I would strongly urge you to spend time on the street, be there. And some more glimpses of how the street evolves during different times of the day. This is early morning when people who are exercising comes to the street and spends time. Shoppers, families who come and spend time there. At night, it takes a whole new form itself. So some glimpses. Now, some of the challenges that were reflected back then with this one project was the need that there's a need for a long-term vision, which some of the other speakers also said, that you need an alignment of different projects in the city to a common vision itself. There is a need for, like you saw on the map, not fragmented approaches, but a network-based approach, where it's not a small kilometer of a cycle track which stops in a dead end, but a network of cycle tracks. Similarly, a network of footpaths that covers a full area. So the need for that came up. Building footpaths is good, but then if you don't manage the parking, you have the two-wheeler, four-wheeler coming and parking on it, and it continues to be a challenge where the city is figuring out its parking management system. And importantly, operations and maintenance as well. That if you don't maintain it through a good O&M system, then all the money that you've invested goes down the drain and it is not maintained well. And few other learnings as well. Now, incorporating some of these learnings is what the city has taken the next steps on the Mega Streets project, which one of the speakers briefly touched upon. In a summary, for those of you who are not aware, the Mega Streets project is this, where they have taken the same network-based approach across 6 packages or 6 neighborhoods in Chennai that are mentioned here. Not going into too much detail, but there are 6 consultants across local consultants and national consultants who have come on board using a robust RFP. They have developed designs for it. There is a World Bank Chennai City partnership which has helped streamline this project along with a few other projects in the pipeline. And these are some glimpses. For example, it focuses on mobility, which are safer streets for all the users. Number 2, livability, about managing parking, vending, neighborhood planning, creating iconic spaces. And it looks very importantly at utilities. That is the elements under the ground, because very often you have the surface elements that are done, and the next day another utility department comes and digs it up, and the cost is lost. It's additional cost, a lot of inconvenience, and it reflects a lot of lack of planning. So integrating utilities is also something which the city is looking at this, and the DPRs for this for many streets are already prepared and others are in the pipeline. These are some glimpses of the proposed transformations. This image that you see of MC Road in north of Chennai, the Bhumi Puja just got done, I think last week, and the construction has commenced as well. So 2 streets, the construction work has already commenced as we speak, and a few more are in the pipeline. Alongside this, to the first point of network planning, the city realized the importance of multimodal integration as well, which some of the speakers earlier mentioned. So there are a few multimodal integration projects of connecting with the suburban metro rail, bus systems, and even the metro systems which happen to be in the area, how to make it more seamless, to understand the users, their needs, so that they have a seamless system in place so that they feel like taking up this choice itself. Towards the intent of having a common vision and working towards it. As per the NUTP, though UMTAs were mandated and there were many UMTAs set up across this city, a very handful of them, or hardly any, were operationalized. But very proud to say that currently in Chennai, the KUMTA is a very strong team that continues to grow in terms of hiring technically strong team members, and also in the initiatives that it's taking up. So KUMTA is in a very strong space as it continues to grow and bring the different stakeholders to a common vision. Chennai has also set up what is called as a gender and policy lab, which some of you would have heard. The intent cross-cuts mobility and other areas to bring the importance of gender-sensitive and inclusive mobility planning into the system. So just briefly touching on the parking management point, which one of the earlier speakers also mentioned about how there is a need to look at an area-based approach to parking. So Chennai had implemented parking management in a few stretches of the city, and there was revenue coming there, but there was certain things that were not working in the system because it was not an area-based approach. Hence, the city right now, anchored by KUMTA, KUMTA has prepared the parking policy. ITDP has supported on that front, and it's in the verge of adoption as well. The city is also preparing an area-level parking management plan for one neighborhood, and to implement that, to take the learnings and then scale it up across the city as well. So the city has learned, and it's looking at how to improve the system. I'm not going into much detail because this might have been discussed in previous webinars or upcoming ones about the CMP that's under preparation, the third master plan that's ongoing, etc. Briefly touching on public transportation, other speakers have covered in detail, but as Professor Geetam Tiwari mentioned, rightly said, in Chennai, it's far below the MOHUA standards compared to other Indian cities or even international cities. And there are good examples in India itself. If you look at this example in Bhubaneswar, which CRUT has done, you have good designs that are being done along with route rationalization, route planning, and good user experience service design that is done in a place. So there are examples that Chennai is learning from and can improve their system itself. But to summarize, building on some of the, reinforcing the points that other speakers mentioned, that one, it's about embedding a sustainable transport vision. We do need more buses, greener buses, and reliable buses in the system. And definitely engaging and attracting our users to pick that up as a choice, to make it more seamless for them itself. The second component, keeping it very brief, is the learnings from other cities. So just a summary to step back. So Chennai had adopted the NMT policy, the first city in the country back then. But today you have more than 15 cities who have adopted similar healthy streets or NMT policies as well. So it's one fact on the table. Many other cities have formed similar committees called as healthy streets or NMT committees and cells, where they bring together decision makers to strategize and think forward next steps. Many cities, like the ones listed here, 19 in number, have developed long-term plans. They've developed like network plans and also 3-year action plans on what needs to be done in year 1, year 2, year 3. What is the cost required for it? How many kilometers needs to be done every year? So there are other cities who are also working on this front already. And these are some glimpses to show how cities across the country, north to south, east to west, have taken up projects, pilot projects, have done it well, are looking at scaling it up. From Pimpri-Chinchwad to Bhopal to Chandigarh, even smaller cities like Jhansi, Nagpur, have taken up, even hilly cities like Kohima in the northeast have found a way to prioritize pedestrians in their own way. Some glimpses across cities, happy to share the presentation later. Some bigger projects in cities like Srinagar that have come up recently, in Bhubaneswar, Newtown, Kolkata that you see here, Bengaluru, in Kozhikode, Indore, Ahmedabad, who has been a champion. So there are projects compared to a decade back. Today, when you look back, this conversation has become a lot more mainstream on one side, looking at it optimistically, but there is a long way to go as well. So that is where I'd like to just informally take a pause, that similar to professional or personal career journeys of success, people often think that it's a very straight line of how it is, or even for cities or projects, money is given and a city goes and does it. But in reality, like in our personal lives, it's not a straight upward trajectory where there are a lot of ups and downs, a lot of learnings that come through the journey. Everyone is figuring it out as well. So this has been the journey, and this might continue to be the journey for many cities, including Chennai. But it's important to pause and reflect on what the learnings are so that you can course correct going ahead. So some of the challenges across these cities I skimmed through, especially on the NMT front, is one, that there is a lack of a long-term vision, strong political leadership, and a roadmap itself towards it. With a change of leadership, it often changes. There's a lack of technical capacity towards implementing that if you have a vision also. You might have a policy, you might not have a roadmap, but not even a good team to implement it. So cities who have hired, strengthen their teams, like a playing team, and they're able to perform better. Like many speakers touched upon earlier, political will and funding to make the vision a reality is something which many cities are struggling. Number 4, good implementation is key. You might have the best idea and design, but if it's not implemented well, that's a miss. And the need to integrate your idea with other projects that are happening. You can't do your projects in silos, but to integrate it with others. Number 5, specific to this space, in particular, the importance of parking management and priced and dynamic parking management itself. And lastly, there is also a need of a strong public awareness, building support for such projects from the people's side as well. So with that, just to summarize before I close, that if you look at 6 steps of sorts that have worked in some of these cities, one is laying the foundation for your success. Policies alone won't cut it, like what the other speakers mentioned, but policies are one step in the right direction. You can have policies, you should have a network plan for scale up, you should have progressive guidelines that help your team. And that's what many cities across the country have started on already, be it parking policies, design guidelines, network plans. Number 2, cities often mention fund crunches. At the same time, many cities have explored innovative sources of funding and financing. This is a small list of innovative sources. For example, Pimpri-Chinchwad is exploring green bonds. So different financial instruments are being explored today and not necessarily dependent on development banks for loans, etc. So travel demand management measures like parking management, which can generate a lot of revenue. So funding and financing is a key conversation to figure. Number 3, hiring a strong team. If you don't have a strong team who can play the match for you and win the game for you, then the battle is not gone forward. So it's important to have robust RFPs in place to either hire good consultants or to hire good team members within your own city teams so that you can develop the designs. And some of these examples that are seen are done by high quality designers. Number 4, having a team is one, but it's important to constantly upskill your team and to build their team's muscle. And number 5, the importance of doing things together. That though public participation is at times a checkbox in the list of things, if you do it well and you do it with the right intent, it does wonders when people come and support you for the project. And lastly, going back to my earlier point, importance to pause and see what has worked and not worked. Impact assessment of what the projects have worked, what has not worked will help you improve the work that you take it forward. So I'll close with the same piece that, many of us on this call are either academics or people who have been practicing in the space for many years. Some of us might be working in corporations. And what has motivated you to be in this public sector is something that motivates all of us. It's what unites all of us. And that common thread and our efforts is actually leading to impact when you see projects like this across the country. It's champions like all of us who have been advocating for this in many parts of the country, who have led to projects like this, and it has caused visible improvement in equality and other things as well. So this wouldn't have been possible, let's say 10, 15 years back, but it is possible right now. So hence it's up to us on what is the vision that we want to look at for the next 10 years. And let's work together for that. So I'd like to end on an optimistic note that looking forward to the webinar series itself on the upcoming ones and what we can learn from them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Venugopal. Extremely interesting presentation. Chitrakshi, can I have my presentation up, please? Since I'm going last, and I think so many of the speakers before me have covered most of the points, I'll be very brief with what I have here to present. As you know, and as we introduced in the beginning, our focus here was to look at climate action, to look at urban action in the context of climate change. And one of the things that we have done since about April last year till about September was to prepare this approach paper, and in the course of doing which, the Chennai Corporation also released its climate action plan. So we took account of what they had said and also sort of reflected on it. And in this approach paper, we've looked at the existing context, at climate impacts, at measures for adaptation and resilience, as well as mitigation potential across major sectors of the city. And as I said in the very opening introductory remarks, given the multidimensionality of climate impacts, as well as what few people realize, or not enough people realize, is that even measures to reduce emissions really have multidimensional impacts and multi-sectoral impacts. So our study particularly looked at these cross-sectoral impacts and looked at co-benefits that can be obtained across sectors, as also between adaptation and mitigation. And a point that we emphasized when we wrote the approach paper specifically is that we see this as a first iteration, which would be updated through interaction with stakeholders as we proceed with this. So we don't see this approach paper as some kind of a definitive statement. And I'm particularly grateful for the interactions in this webinar, where speakers have taken the trouble to look at our approach paper and to critique it. And I really appreciate those inputs, and I can already see many areas in which we would be making changes to this as we go along. Next, please. So the approach paper looks at 7 or 8 sections divided between adaptation and mitigation, of which I spoke already. And this particular section or presentation is on transportation. Next, please. Yeah. This presentation was to be made by my colleague Karthik, who during the course of our study was specifically looking at the transportation sector. But since he's unavailable here, I've sort of taken up that responsibility to do this. So the setting in Chennai, and remember that we are looking here at essentially at mitigation, how to reduce emissions from the transportation sector, while given the multidimensionality of transportation, we also looked at other issues and sectors which could cut into it. So very briefly, and I think Venugopal has already touched on many of these areas, the transportation system in Chennai caters to about 10 to 12 million people across the Chennai metropolitan area. And out of this entire population to which the system caters, 12% only is really utilizes the public transport system, covering buses, suburban rail, and of course the fledgling metro, whereas close to 90% is really utilizing private personal vehicles. And yet, having said that, the usage in terms of percentage of people really is not material. It's how much distance they travel, how many trips, how many passenger kilometers are carried. So if you look at that, the buses carry about 3 million passengers a day. The suburban rail carries about 1.7 million passengers per day. So that's a very large percentage not reflected in the previous data point shown there. Despite that, the city roads are choked, a high traffic load, and the transport sector is the second largest source of emissions in Chennai. It's about 16% of total emissions, which is expected to grow till about 6 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030 and 8 million tons by 2050, if there is business as usual trajectory here. And the point that Anumita made, we've also noted that air pollution, if you look at the bland figure, it doesn't look very high. It's at about 58 microgram per cubic meter average, of course, which is, of course, still more than the national standard, and much more than the WHO standard yet. The impact of that air pollution can be quite high, which Anumita talked about. And also the fact that being a coastal city, the pollution is being generated all right, which is being felt at the street level, but is blown away by the sea breezes across the city. So it doesn't stay there like it does during the winter in Delhi, etc. Next, please. Yeah, so if you look at the modal split, reflects the high inefficiency of the transportation system, which is dominated by two-wheelers and four-wheelers. The share of buses and of non-motorized transport has been steadily declining, and only about 28% of people depend on the public transport. Revealingly, the buses cover only about 7% of the road network, mostly the arterial roads. And the buses cover around close to 400 kilometers out of a total of 5,000 plus kilometers of road. And as I said, yet these 3,500 odd buses carry about 3.7 million passenger kilometers there, while personal vehicles, 5.5 million personal vehicles carry only 2.2 million passenger kilometers, which reflects the fact that the road space, all those kilometers of roads are largely occupied by these personal vehicles, whereas the buses, which are fewer, carry more passenger kilometers and yet occupy so little of the space. So in a sense, the public transport, the low-income users are crowded out by the personal vehicle users, and the roads are really used for moving vehicles rather than for moving people, which is a cliche in public transport circles, but I think this illustrates the point clearly. Next, please. Yeah, so if you look at emissions again, that is reflected, this reflects what we have just seen, that this is a highly energy inefficient transportation system, which is reflected in the emissions from the transport sector. 84% of the emissions from the transport sector are from personal transit, from two-wheelers or four-wheelers, and only about 8.6% comes from the bus fleet, even though all of it is diesel buses, which may seem surprising in this day and age, but that's there. So the vehicles carrying the relatively less people across less distances cause the most emissions, the most air pollution, and the most congestion on the roads, which indicates the necessity, if you want to look to check vehicle emissions, then it is necessary to make a big shift from personal transport to public transport, and a big energy shift away from petroleum IC-based vehicles to other modes. I recognize the point made by everybody that technology is not the key thing when you're looking at transport. But then when you're looking at transport and emissions, the non-emitting or less emitting vehicles also has to be integrated into that system. Now, this has significant co-benefits if we manage to bring these changes. The first is reduction in air pollution. Huge reduction if you reduce the number of two-wheelers and four-wheelers there. More equity, because this is then brings about more access for low-income groups who can use buses and other means, more efficient use of the urban space, which you can then do what Venugopal was talking about, clear spaces for pavements, for dedicated cycle paths, etc. It will open up the path for redesigned urban form and transit mode. The question, of course, which we asked is, will it or can it open the way for more non-motorized transport? So I'll come quickly to the potential solutions and what we have discussed in our report. Next, please. Yeah. So the first, I wouldn't use the word solutions. I would rather say responses that we can do is a modal shift, which, as I have already discussed, is a major shift from two-wheelers or four-wheelers to buses and to metro rail when it matures. Right now, it's only carrying about 20,000 passengers a day. But there is a requirement for a major expansion of the bus system in terms of numbers, in terms of coverage of the city, in terms of routes that it can take. One of the reasons why it has low ridership is it doesn't go to so many parts of the city. You have to get off the bus and then look for other means of transport and frequency. And if you introduce convenience and comfort incentives, what Anumita was talking about, then you can bring about higher ridership also. The last mile connectivity and integration with other forms of transport, intermediate transport especially, is important. And of course, you require a major expansion of non-motorized transport, both pedestrian as well as cycles. But this has difficulties despite the advantages that Venugopal talked about. The benefits of this, of course, are, from the emissions point of view, major reduction in emissions, but it has very significant co-benefits as well. Reduced road congestion, enormous increase in productivity by reducing the amount of time people take to travel in an otherwise inefficient system. Equity, which I've already spoken about. Reducing air pollution, especially if this is combined with a fuel shift in buses, for example, which will then generate health benefits, and it will facilitate urban redesign for greater livability, etc. Next, please. The second response is in fuel shift. And this is the technology part, which is necessary when you're talking about mitigations. The Chennai Climate Action Plan has, we found to our surprise, a rather modest target of ensuring towards a target of 10% electric vehicles by the year 2040 and 20% electric vehicles by the year 2050. This surprised us a lot. Seems a very slow process. This is even slower than the national targets, which is targeting 50% electric vehicles by 2035 or so. We feel that there can be a much faster, much quicker transition, particularly in electric two-wheelers. Taxi fleets, the shift can be quite fast, whereas some more additional incentives can be required for electric three-wheelers and four-wheelers. And a rapid transition to EV buses is very feasible. We've already seen in Delhi a rapid expansion. The government has just announced, union government, 100,000 electric buses scheme. And after all, a large number of these electric buses are made in the Chennai automobile complex, as are the electric two-wheelers as well. The Chennai Action Plan also speaks of higher dosing with ethanol blended petrol and biodiesel. We are very skeptical about this move. Even the national targets of 20% biodiesel, it's gone a long time back. The ethanol blending, it's finding it extremely difficult to meet in competition with potable alcohol and the sugar industry. It's just not happening. We don't see an expansion happening at all, nor is it a particularly sustainable or eco-friendly solution but that's another discussion we can have some other time. And again, while the main benefits are large and quick emissions reductions by this fuel shift, there are these co-benefits as well in terms of air pollution, reducing healthcare costs, and better livability. But this will add to a load for solar energy tomorrow in terms of charging stations with its attendant problems. We'll talk about that some other time. Next, please. And our third issue I'd like to speak just for a minute or so, since we've had a lot of discussion on NMT and pedestrialization. Venugopal spoke a lot about it. We felt that in terms of implementation, this is perhaps the most difficult option because it will require major behavioral change, major infrastructure change, and the point that Venugopal was mentioning, the uninterrupted nature that you require in order to ensure that it becomes systemic. You need dedicated and uninterrupted bicycle tracks, walkways, etc., and may also require urban redesign and zoning changes, but the co-benefits are quite clear, and to the extent that it is feasible, we should introduce that to the extent possible as well. So this is very briefly what we have presented in our study. I would certainly look at the NMT options more carefully now that Venugopal has presented that in so much detail. We'll certainly study the changes in Chennai and examine how we can sort of incorporate those into our perspective, particularly with regard to bringing about co-benefits to a mitigation approach and using those to popularize or sell the idea of a mitigations approach, an emissions reduction approach, which will bring about urban transformation in many ways. I'll stop there with this thing. I have a small one side more, I think, Chitrakshi. Chitrakshi, is there one slide more? Okay, I think Chitrakshi is taking, yeah. So the last slide I had was that, as I said, transportation is closely linked with all other aspects of urban context, of design, processes, and citizens' ways of life. The transportation systems must obviously then be viewed keeping these multiple dimensions in mind. One can't just be looking at emissions and not that. So in the context of climate change, while the need to cut emissions and go towards low carbon pathways, transportation has a big role. And major mitigation can be achieved by specific measures, which we have discussed earlier, but transformative change, which is what we are looking for, will require these interconnected measures. All the measures that Anumita, Geetam ji, and Venugopal was talking about, if you look at transportation, even without looking at emissions, there are these major changes that need to be built. And what we need to do while looking at emissions is to integrate those changes with the technological and other changes required in order to bring about a reduction in emissions. So we must do different things, all right, but we must also do things differently. We have to envisage and visualize this because a future net zero cities need a new holistic perspective that we need to work on. Thank you very much. I'll stop there. So thank you once again for this. And I think people would have noted some of the questions that have come on the Q&A and on the chat. There are 2 or 3 questions which have come on disability. And I think, which I see both in the Q&A as well as in the chat box. If Venugopal would like to take those, I'd appreciate that.
Happy to. I've tried responding to the question shared by Mr. Rajiv on the chat as well. But
Venugopal, a little louder, please.
Sure. I hope I'm audible now. I've tried to respond to the question by Mr. Rajiv on the chat itself. Just to be very realistic, for example, I cycle. I cycle to work as well whenever I can. During the pandemic, my wife as well picked up cycling, seeing me. But then she's not as confident a cyclist, and she often asks me if I'm pushing her towards an accident, especially at intersections and other areas, because it's very scary for a new person to take up. The point that I'm trying to convey is, even for normal pedestrians and cyclists, the reality on the ground of the infrastructure is extremely challenging, and the kind of news that you read daily about accidents happening, it's a cloudy reality that we are in, where through the examples that I shared, hopefully the cloud is clearing and all our actions are leading to change. But that's the context that I'd like to just lay out there. So even for the likes of, so the reality for persons with disabilities and senior citizens, how the city is trying to approach it right now is what I've shared in the chat, where for the designs that are ongoing right now, and for the designs that are being prepared and implemented, for example, for mega streets, as part of the mandate, they have ensured that they have discussions with varied stakeholders at all stages of the projects. For the Khadar Damaskan Road, for example, and MC Road, for which work is ongoing right now, when the project kickstarted, they had discussions contextual to the site with the right stakeholders, a public setting. Back then, I think it was on the pandemic phase, it was online. And through the different stages, even at the implementation stage as well, there are stakeholder consultations ongoing. And these stakeholder consultations ensure that the designers and engineers get the locals who include senior citizens, include persons with disabilities, to come and be part of such discussions. But having said that, I think there are some things that have worked in this direction, but there is a lot more that needs to be done towards looking at inclusive mobility more holistically in the city. That's the 2 cents that I can share right now. But there are good examples in cities like Bangalore, and I think a few in Delhi, where there are specific projects, specific interventions that are being done with more insights from persons with disabilities, senior citizens, etc. So those are examples I think Chennai will look at. One specific project I think in Chennai, which you might have read online, is the access to beaches, which I think the Gender Lab also played a strong role with Urban Design Collective, where they've given a ramp accessing all the way to Marina Beach to the waters, which persons with people on wheelchairs and persons with disabilities have an opportunity to go all the way to access. But in normal pedestrian footpath infrastructure, I think there is quite a long way to go for the city to learn from and implement it.
Thank you very much, Venugopal. Without even specific questions, there's one fairly long comment which has come here on the Q&A by Harry Dimitriou, who has essentially said that many of these questions and issues have been raised for many years, but in their implementation, they have been very slow. I would recognize that, but I also think that in many parts of the world, some of these have picked up pace. But he's highlighted 2 points very well, which is that treating transport as a market mechanism rather than as a service is perhaps one major factor why this is not taken off. And he points to issues of governance capabilities. If any of our panelists wishes to take that up, Anumita or Geetam ji, if you want to address that.
Yeah, I can. I think he was in fact referring to what I said. I know him very well. Actually, what I was pointing out, that if we have been, especially we have been treating bus as a business. So basically, the bus systems should generate enough revenues. Otherwise, as you know, that many states have in fact completely done away with organized public transport system, because they started making huge, they were not making enough profits. And then there has always been talk of public-private partnership, how regulation should be with public organizations. And but we keep repeating that government alone cannot do it. But anywhere in the world, if you see, public transport does not make profit. It has to be treated as a service. And we have to find different ways of what I was also alluding to. You have to find different ways of subsidizing it.
Yeah.
You have to provide it. You cannot say that, in fact, that's precisely what we are doing for metro.
Exactly.
And I keep wondering that why are we not using the same yardstick for buses then?
Yes,
So that's why this integration is very, very important.
absolutely.
So public transport, I mean, even if, whoever is using a bus is already giving you less, all the benefits that you have listed,
Correct.
contributing to less congestion, less pollution, less global pollution, etc. So we should,
Correct.
in fact, many people even consider running it free.
In fact, there are many cities in Europe which are doing that, which are offering public service, public transport free.
Yes. But one of the important thing is, which Anumita also highlighted, if a very clean, free bus is getting stuck in congestion,
Yeah, there is no point.
you need to use it.
Yeah, quite right.
To that, Raghu, I would just like to add the point is that, it's very interesting in India today. It is not a legal mandate of any state government to provide public transport, if you really technically think about it. I mean, if a city doesn't provide public transport, so what? Right? And there are many cities that do not. So it's only few cities who have got state transport undertakings, right? So clearly there is fundamentally something wrong with the legal underpinning of that what state governments need to provide as a service. And therefore, today, the entire Central Motor Vehicle Act and rule that is designed only to regulate a permit system, which again is just about regulating the market. That I just issue you a permit to operate the bus so that it becomes a livelihood and a job issue. But it's really not a public transport service issue. And therefore, when we compare it with metro, so metro, which has got an infrastructure status, it gets all the financial and all the subsidies that are that are tied with it and clear systems. But then the bus system has no clear regulatory framework. So somewhere we also have to address that.
Quite right. Any last comments any of the panelists would like to make? Anumita, Geetamji, Venugopal.
I have a short comment because you talked about, your response 3 on NMT, and you said this is required, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
And, I would like to get into more detailed discussion on this because
Sure, I appreciate that. I mean, I must admit, frankly speaking, my heart went for NMT, but my brain is telling me, especially coming from Delhi, that it's one of the most difficult things to implement here. Despite all the efforts, look at pavements on the street, look at pedestrianization, look at our cycle tracks, which we laid way back 30 years, and they've all gone. So there are difficulties involved in that, and knowing the way systems work in this country, I felt, yes, these are desirable, they are required, but they are probably, given the way our systems work, the last things that are going to happen. We would like to accelerate them well, but yeah, but however, having gone through this discussion, I am quite prepared to change my mind and move my brain towards my heart.
just one quick thing because we don't have long time for discussion here. The way many cities are doing it, Paris is doing it, but many other cities have done it in the past.
Sure.
You have to set a target, a vision. By
Sure.
2030, we want to be NMT friendly.
Yeah.
And then work backwards. Then you have a plan. In next 2 years, I would achieve this much.
Sure.
And so on. So
Yeah.
we have to move systematically.
I agree.
If we just keep doing, one stretch here and one stretch there, and we are in the pilot mode all the time.
Sure. I agree with you.
I think
I agree with you.
strategy is required.
See, even Venugopal's presentation, excellent presentation, it's in bits. and he himself is saying that, so unless all these are built and put together into a city-wide system, like cycle tracks or like dedicated pavements, footpaths, etc., become part of the city's infrastructure all over, rather than stay as pilot projects. That's, but well, good pilot projects, if they expand and become part of the cityscape, then great, they'll become hopefully tomorrow integrated systems.
But Raghu, my final comment on
Yes.
this today, that currently what happens is we talk about NMT, we say bus, we say metro, we say integration, but all remain very isolated in their planning and in their approach. I think the entire funding system now needs to be changed so that you create cluster of projects in which you're aligning all the infrastructure needs in a way that that funding instrument is being able to address the bus system, the requisite walking and cycling access to the system or to the integration. So unless we change that framework, we will always see this kind of stepmotherly happening, even when we say NMT needs to be the central focus of the change.
True.
So a lot of those real hard changes are needed today.
True. Excellent. Thank you. We have 15 minutes past our time. Yes.
Geetamji's, someone was asking for Geetamji's report link.
Yeah.
Ma'am, can please share. You're muted, ma'am.
Yes, I can share the presentation with you. And on the first slide, I've given the link.
Yeah, the link is there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just email it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If I could ask the other participants also, if they won't mind sharing the presentation, it would be deeply appreciated.
Sure.
So thank you very much. I think as far as I'm concerned, I'll thank all the participants, all my panelists who have come for the excellent presentation. And I must tell you, Venugopal in his chat has said, although they are tough, these measures, but if cracked, they will be more impactful than the low-hanging fruit for long-term change. I agree with that. And I can tell you, my needle has moved after this discussion today. So thank you once again to all the panelists. I hope we'll get a chance for further discussions on Chennai as well as generally on these issues later as well. And I'll now hand you all back to Kirtiji for his final comments, if he likes. Kirti bhai?
No final comments at all. Thank you very much, because it's 140 minutes of immense learning, very wise and incredibly rich, I think, presentation. So thank you very much. All I want to say. I also want to say that, Chennai, we are trying to make, as a theater for trying these ideas, and we would come and reach you, I think, time and again for your views and for your insights, for your suggestions. And we hope that, we'll be able to go somewhere. So thank you very much, Geetamji. Thank you, Raghu Saab. Thank you, Anumita ji. Thank you, Venugopal Saab. And of course, thank you, my colleagues, Chitrakshi and Bhuma and everyone else who's made this possible. I time and again wonder how did we reach this far, 105 webinars, but it's all happening because of them. And I'm very grateful, and this was tremendous learning experience. So thank you very much. Venugopalji, I think we'll pick you up at some point of time and want to hear more. And Geetamji, tonight, if not too late, or maybe tomorrow, I will call you to request you to read my letter, and then we'll be more ahead on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Raghu Saab, thank you very much.
Good night. Good night.